All right, in this video, we're going to talk about how we evaluate our hypotheses in an MYP lab report. So remember, we've been doing a lab where we designed a lab that shows how changing the mass of sand in a cup affects how far the cup moves when it's hit by a marble. So you have already completed the criterion B part of this lab. You wrote the lab, you determined the independent and the dependent variables, you identified constants, you wrote a procedure, you wrote a hypothesis, you've done all those things for setting it up. And then you've collected the data, you have put it in a raw data table, you have processed the data, you have made a graph, and you have interpreted the data. So now we are on to evaluating the hypothesis. And evaluating just means judging the quality of. And in the case of this lab report, what we're doing is we are determining whether our hypothesis is supported, partially supported, or not supported by our data. So remember, we are going to be graded on this rubric here, and this is the strand that we're looking at. So it is criterion C strand 3. And we are hoping to get everybody to the 7-8 level where it says, I have evaluated my hypothesis by considering many possibilities. I have used the data to clearly state if my hypothesis has been supported or not. And I use scientific reasons and sources to help explain my reasoning. So when you are looking at the lab report, you will see that you have your raw data table, your process data table, your graph of your process data table, and your data interpretation all completed. This is the slide we're going to work on. I believe it's slide number, not sure. And then the last thing you'll have to do is this chart here. So this is the slide that we're going to be working on today in this video. So it says at the top here, it says, look back at your hypothesis and your data. Determine if your data supports or does not support your hypothesis. And then there's 3 sentence stems here. It says, I predicted that. And then in parentheses, it says, rewrite hypothesis so that it makes sense as a sentence. Do not just copy and paste it. The next sentence stem says, my data supports / does not support / partially supports my prediction. And then the last sentence stem says, I know this because, explain what's in your data and tells you, explain what it is in your data that tells you your hypothesis was supported / not supported / partially supported. So these 3 sentences, when they are completed, that is your hypothesis evaluation at this point in the year. So this is from the MYP teacher guide, our lab report guide that is on Schoology in the resources folder. If you ever want to look at this again, that is where it's located. And it says evaluating the hypothesis, C.III. And it says, when you evaluate your hypothesis, you will be discussing if it was supported or not. This should reference your data, graph, and any patterns that you found. Be sure to have a very clear statement of your final conclusion. So right here it says, did you prove it? Well, you cannot prove your hypothesis correct. You can only support it. Make sure to discuss the data that supports your thinking. And then here it says, data, 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 data. Make sure to actually discuss datas. Actually use numbers with units to discuss your findings, and then refer to the table and the graph to support your thoughts. So what you're doing here is you are making your thinking visible to me, the reader. You are telling me how you know that your hypothesis was supported, partially supported, or not supported. And you are showing me that you understand what the graph is telling you. There's 2 ways that we are telling the teacher or telling the evaluator that we understand our graph, and that is in the data interpretation and then the hypothesis evaluation. So what do I need in order to evaluate my hypothesis? You are going to need a hypothesis, you are going to need process data, and you're going to need a graph. So those are the 3 pieces of information that you will need to collect before you can start evaluating your hypothesis. So we're going to use an example to show how to fill this out. So remember, the example we've been using in these videos is that Bitmoji Ms. Jung is wondering if changing the circumference of, which is the distance around a soccer ball, will make it so that she can kick it farther. Our independent variable was the circumference of the ball, and the unit is centimeters. Our dependent variable is the distance the ball is kicked, and that unit is in meters. So We have a hypothesis for this lab. We're going to need one in order to evaluate the hypothesis. So the hypothesis for this lab was if I change the circumference of the ball from 65 centimeters to 70 centimeters, then the distance that the ball goes will decrease because a 70 centimeter ball is larger, so it's going to have more air resistance acting on it than a 65 centimeter ball, and that is from Scientific American. I have a process data table, and I also have a graph. So I have my three things that I need. I have my hypothesis, I have my process data table, and I have my graph. I'm ready to start. So how do I fill out the template? I'm going to start right here, and it says, I predicted that, rewrite hypothesis so it makes sense as a sentence, do not just copy and paste it. So what I see a lot of kids doing is they copy that and then they just plop it in. I predicted that if I change the blah, 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 blah. Please do not do that. That's not okay. Please rewrite your hypothesis so that it is summarized and it makes sense as a sentence. So what I wrote was, I predicted that increasing the circumference of the ball would make the ball go a shorter distance because the larger ball would have more air resistance. That is basically my hypothesis, just summarized and shortened and put into this sentence so that it makes sense. All right, the next section is whether your data supports, does not support, or partially supports your prediction. In order to do this, you're going to have to look at your process data table and your graph. So what I see was that when the circumference of the ball increased, the distance the ball went decreased. Circumference goes up, distance the ball is kicked goes down. That is what I said in my hypothesis. I said that as the circumference of the ball goes from 65 to 75, the distance the ball is kicked will go down. So to me, my hypothesis is supported. My prediction is supported by my data. So I deleted all the other options and I selected supported. So now I need to explain how I know this. So what I'm going to do is explain what's in my data that tells me this. So again, when I look at my data table, and this might all seem like, dumb as Jung, just look at the data table. But here's the thing, folks. I know how to interpret a data table. I need to know that you know how to interpret a data table. So even though you might be thinking like, this is so obvious, why do I need to write it down? You gotta write it down. That's how I evaluate what you actually know. So again, when I look at the data table, I see that as the circumference goes up, the distance the ball goes down because 3.9 is greater than 3.1. I also see that in my graph, the one that is for 65 centimeters is higher up than the one that is for 70 centimeters. So I will put that into a couple sentences. So what I wrote is, I know this because my data shows that when the circumference of the ball was 65 centimeters, the ball went 3.9 meters on average. But when the circumference of the ball was 70 centimeters, the ball went 3.1 meters on average. So that sentence right there is me just summarizing my data in a way that supports my hypothesis. Then I add one more sentence here just to clarify so that my teacher or the evaluator or the reader really knows that I know what I'm talking about. So I summarize again and I say the 70 centimeter ball went 0.8 meters less far on average than the 65 centimeter ball. So again, the first two parts of this should be pretty simple to fill out. The last one, you just have to do a little bit of thinking. Please keep in mind that you are trying to explain to me what it is that you know. So what do I do now? You are going to find your hypothesis from the Criterion B lab report. You are going to get your process data and your graph, and then you will complete the hypothesis evaluation slide in your lab report. When you finish, you're going to move on to the method evaluation and improvement slide. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.